West of Locq Ninh, on the 2nd of May, 1968, a 12-man reconnaissance team from Detachment B-56 crossed into Cambodia and was surrounded within hours by a force the Army estimated at 1,000 North Vietnamese soldiers. 4 Americans and their indigenous teammates lay pinned in the brush, dead and dying. The man who got most of them out was not on the team. Staff Sergeant Roy Benavidez jumped into that landing zone with a medical bag and a knife, no rifle. By the time the last helicopter lifted off, he had been wounded 37 times, shot, bayoneted, clubbed, and torn by grenade fragments. He was still moving. 8 men flew out alive because he would not stop. By 1968, the most dangerous job in Vietnam wasn't flying a Phantom or walking point in the Iron Triangle. It was getting on a helicopter with a 5-man recon team and crossing a border that, officially, the United States never crossed. These were the men of MACV-SOG, the Studies and Observations Group, a name deliberately chosen to mean nothing. Small teams, usually 3 Americans and a handful of indigenous fighters, dropped into the sanctuaries the North Vietnamese thought were safe, Laos, and the Cambodian salient called the Fishhook. The numbers tell you what that work cost. By 1968, SOG recon casualties had passed 100%, every man wounded at least once, roughly half of them killed that year. When a sergeant in Detachment B-56, Project Sigma, asked the intelligence officer what he was signing up for, the answer was flat: the highest casualty rate of any unit in Vietnam. That was the recruiting pitch. The Fishhook is where the trail came to ground. American intelligence believed the entire North Vietnamese logistics network funneled through base areas 352 and 353, the home ground of the 7th NVA Division. So a team led by Sergeant First Class Leroy Wright drew an assignment with a political edge: find a truck loaded with Soviet and Chinese supplies and drag it back over the border. Physical proof for the world's press that Cambodia was arming the war. On the morning of the 2nd of May, Wright's 12 men landed and almost immediately spotted 3 enemy soldiers. The compromise spiraled in minutes. An NVA soldier stepped into the open and waved a lone helicopter toward a clearing, a trap. Wright opened fire on the man standing beside the aircraft to break it. The slick clawed back into the air, but the enemy now knew exactly where the team was. The first extraction attempt by the gunships of the 240th Assault Helicopter Company took fire short of the pickup zone. Door gunner Michael Craig was killed on the gun run. The flight turned back toward Locq Ninh, leaking hydraulic fluid, carrying its own wounded. The choppers came home bleeding. The team was still out there, surrounded. And waiting on that airstrip, just back from Mass, was a Special Forces medic who wasn't even on the mission. His name was Raul Benavidez. Everyone called him Roy. Orphaned young, the son of a Mexican farmer and a Yaqui mother, both dead of tuberculosis before he was 8. He shined shoes and picked cotton around El Campo, Texas, and dropped out of school at 15. The Army took him anyway: National Guard, then Airborne, then the 82nd. His first tour in Vietnam nearly ended him. In 1965, advising an infantry regiment, he stepped on a landmine. Doctors told him he would never walk again. He trained himself back to combat fitness in secret, against orders, learning to stand by clawing up a wall at night when the ward was empty. He walked out of Brooke Army Medical Center, passed Special Forces selection, and volunteered for B-56, the unit with the worst odds in the war. There's something you need to know before the rest of this makes sense. A few weeks earlier, in April, Benavidez had been pinned down on a patrol and gotten out alive for one reason: Leroy Wright had come for him. The man whose team was now surrounded was the man who had once saved Roy's life. So when the shot-up Huey settled onto the airstrip, Benavidez didn't wait for orders. He grabbed an aid bag and his knife, no rifle, and climbed onto the next bird heading back. He crossed himself so many times, he said later, that his arms were going like an airplane propeller. Over the landing zone, the helicopter couldn't touch down. Benavidez jumped, roughly 10 feet into the brush, and ran some 75 meters toward Wright's position through small arms fire that kicked dirt at every step. He was hit in the leg before he was halfway. A grenade knocked him down and tore shrapnel across his face. He got up and kept running. What he found was 4 men dead and 8 wounded, pinned in 2 groups. Benavidez had been shot through both cheeks now, 4 molars gone, blood filling his mouth. He worked anyway. He bound wounds, pushed morphine, pulled ammunition and water off the dead and redistributed it, and picked up an AK-47 from the ground. When blood crusted his eyes shut, he called the airstrikes in by sound. Danger close, the fast movers, and the 240th gunships dropping ordnance within meters of his own perimeter. He threw smoke to guide the next helicopter in over the smell of cordite and burning brush. Then Wright was hit and lost the use of his legs. 2 grenades landed between him and his men. Wright threw one back. The second he could not reach in time, so he rolled his body onto it. The blast killed him instantly. The man who had saved Benavidez in April died in front of him in May, and Benavidez crawled to the body, because around Wright's neck was a pouch holding the radio call signs, the signal codes, the top-secret operating instructions that could not, under any circumstances, fall into North Vietnamese hands. He took the pouch. The rescuer had become the rescued, and now Roy carried the thing Wright had died protecting. An extraction Huey came in. Benavidez dragged the wounded toward it under his own suppressing fire and took a round through the abdomen, fragments in the back. In the cockpit, Warrant Officer Larry McKibben, 20 years old, out of Houston, 240th Assault Helicopter Company, was hit through the windscreen. The aircraft crashed on landing. Benavidez pulled the survivors out of the wreck, secured the classified pouch again, and pushed the living into a tight 360-degree circle around the burning airframe. Then he went back to calling fire. He was carrying Staff Sergeant Lloyd Mousseau, the men called him Frenchie, when an NVA soldier who had been lying among the dead rose up and clubbed him across the head with a rifle butt, breaking his jaw, then ran a bayonet into him and slashed both his arms. Benavidez drew the Bowie knife. He killed the man and left the blade in his chest. 2 more rushed the wreck from an angle the door gunner couldn't cover. He killed them both with the AK. Here is the part the geometry explains. 12 men do not survive a battalion in a firefight. They can't win that exchange. What they can do is collapse the sky onto their own heads, pull the airstrikes in so tight, hold the perimeter so small, that the killing radius of American ordnance becomes a wall the enemy cannot cross the last few yards through. It wasn't a stand. It was a controlled implosion. The thing that should have wiped them out was the only thing that kept them alive. The final helicopter belonged to Warrant Officer Roger Waggy, who sat down in the wreckage and the brush fire and held it there. Benavidez loaded every wounded man himself. He kept hold of Mousseau's hand on the way out. I felt his fingers dig into my palm, he remembered, his arm twitching as if electric current was pouring through his body into mine. Frenchie Mousseau died before they reached Locq Ninh. Benavidez made one last crawl around the perimeter to confirm every scrap of classified material was recovered, then collapsed and was dragged aboard. The team had come down on top of a 7th NVA Division base area. By 1968, the North Vietnamese had built dedicated counter-recon companies to hunt SOG teams, standing orders to envelop any compromised team instantly and bracket the landing zones with anti-aircraft fire to choke off rescue. It usually failed. A North Vietnamese general later admitted to historian John Plaster that SOG recon, backed by tactical air, inflicted something like 90% casualties on his counter-recon units. Small teams were that lethal when the sky answered. The cost was real, and the record is honest about only part of it. The mission was compromised from the first contact. 4 of the indigenous teammates died on that landing zone, and their names were never written down. And the harder failure came after. Benavidez was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross, not the Medal of Honor, because the Army required a living eyewitness to the full action, and as far as anyone knew, every man who could testify was dead. Then, in 1980, a small Texas newspaper ran a feature on Benavidez. The Wires picked it up. It reprinted in Australia, and a man named Brian O'Connor read it. The team's radio operator, believed killed on the 2nd of May, in fact alive and living quietly in Fiji. Each had thought the other dead. O'Connor wrote a sworn 10-page account of everything he had seen. On the 24th of February 1981, President Reagan presented the Medal of Honor, telling reporters beforehand that if the story were a movie script, no one would believe it. Bring it back to that airstrip at Locq Ninh, the body bag, the doctor's hand, the man inside who refused to be finished. He outlived the war, the doubt, and the silence, but he never accepted the word the country wanted to give him. "I am not a hero," Benavidez said. "The heroes are the ones who never came back."